A quorum of the board cannot meet physically for the expeditious review of this application. Do I have a motion to approve the statement of necessity as presented?
So moved.
Thank you. And do I have a second?
Second by David Lillard.
Thank you, Mr. Treasurer. And Roger, will you do a roll call vote? Okay, I think you're on mute.
Commissioner Gonzalez,
Yes.
Treasurer Lillard,
Yes.
Miss Megan Castle,
Yes.
Miss Allison Myers,
Yes.
Mr. Arthur Taylor,
Yes.
Chairman Clinch,
Yes.
Mr. Dane Smith.
Yes.
All right, thank you all for approving that. The next item that we have is a review and approval of the minutes from our last meeting, which was held on December 6th, 2021. Those minutes are up on the screen for review, and I believe that everybody has had an opportunity to review them. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes as presented?
I make move to approve them, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Treasurer. And do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you. And Roger, will you do a roll call vote, please?
Mr. Dane Smith,
Aye.
Chairman Clinch,
Aye.
Mr. Arthur Taylor,
Aye.
Miss Allison Myers,
Aye.
Miss Megan Castle,
Aye.
Treasurer Lillard,
Aye.
Commissioner Gonzalez.
Aye.
All right, and the minutes are approved. Thank you. We have 3 new members of the board joining us this meeting, and so I'm very happy to welcome them. Allison Myers currently serves as the Finance Director for the town of Farragut. So welcome, Allison. Arthur Taylor serves as the CFO of the Citizens Bank of Lafayette. Welcome, Arthur. And Megan Castle serves as the CFO of Biltwell Bank. Welcome, Megan, and we're thrilled to have all 3 of you join us. And thank you for your service. All right, I'm going to turn it over to Roger, and he's going to give us a review of the status of the collateral pool.
Thank you, Chairman. Starting on page 5, we have the collateral pool status report as of September 30th, 2022. This report is basically a snapshot of a moment in time of the collateral pool. It's divided into the 90% pledge level banks and then the banks that are pledging at 115% pledge level. Currently, there are 90 banks that are pledging at 90% and 2 banks that are pledging at 115%. And so as you're looking at this report, the first column is the bank's FDIC number. The second column is where it says CPID, that's the bank number in the treasury system. Then you have the bank name, you have the percent liability, which is the public deposits of that bank divided by the total public deposits in the pool. Then you have the average public deposit amount, you have their collateral target, the market value of their collateral, and then the percent to target, and then the percent to public deposits. And so just looking at this moment in time, there was 2 banks on this report that were not pledged sufficient as of this day. You can see it's First Bank Lexington, and you can see they're 83% to target, 74.93% to public deposits. Then going further down, you can see Tower Community Bank, they're 95% to their target and 85% to public deposits. And both of these were cleared up within the allowable 2 business days, and seeing deficiencies from time to time is completely normal. And moving down to page 8, we're getting into the two banks that are at the 115% pledge level. And you can see they're sufficiently pledged there. Are there any questions on this report before we move to the quarterly performance reports? Okay. So looking at page 9, the performance reports are quarterly. We get this from our vendor Veribank on a quarterly basis. And these reports are divided into two groups of banks. We have banks that did not elect into the community bank leverage ratio framework. And then we have the banks that did opt in for community bank leverage ratio. And so we have, out of the 92 banks in the pool, there's 70 that are not in the framework, and then 22 that are. So this first group is the banks that are not community bank, they're not community bank leverage ratio banks. And so there's 70 here, and you can see 49 past 9 of 9 ratios, 15 past 8 of 9, so on and so forth. Moving to the middle of the page, you can see they have the benchmarks listed there. And for example, the primary capital, 68 out of the 70 passed, 2 failed. And then moving on to the bottom of the report, it gives you this group's average on how they did as this for this group here for each ratio. Looking at page 10, you can see this is the community bank leverage ratio banks. And as mentioned, there's 22. And you can see we're 13 of 22 past 8 of 8 ratios. Also, you can see with community bank leverage ratio, the banks that opted into community bank leverage ratio framework, there's 8 ratios for those banks, and they must pass 6 of 8, as well as 2 of 3 capital ratios. For the non-CBLR banks, they must pass 9 of 9 ratios and 3 of 4 capital ratios. And so that's why you're seeing 8 of 8 here. And then there's 8 ratios here. And moving to the bottom of this report, you can see the average for this group for each ratio. Looking at page 11, these just have, this is the non-CBLR group. This is just the group of banks that did not opt into community bank leverage ratio framework. And they have each bank listed individually, and you can see the ratios passed, failed, and their pledge level. And so, for example, you could look at First Farmers and Merchants Bank. You can see they passed 7 of 9, which is one part of it, but they did not pass 3 of 4 capital. So with failing 2 of 4 capital ratios, they will be at the 115% pledge level. This is the second page of that same group. And now we're getting into the CBLR banks. And you can see there's one less ratio here. And looking at page 14, there's a summary of the pledge level changes for this performance period. And you can see where 3 banks moved into the 115% pledge level, and 1 bank went from 115 back to the 90% pledge level. Are there any questions on those reports?
All right, thank you, Roger. That's a good summary, and the collateral pool is in good shape. So we're ready to move on to the next item, which is the review of a new applicant to the pool, Commercial Bank and Trust Company. And Roger is going to bring that application up on the screen.
Okay, that's starting on page 15, Commercial Bank and Trust Company. It's a state chartered bank. Date of operation is 1877. You can see the three most senior officers there. And they have approximately 40 million in public deposits. They will use PNC as their trustee custodian. And we have their bank graphs here as far as the performance ratios that we measure. Performance ratio 1 and 2, they just missed this time for June with the most recent data available, June 30. And they did pass the rest of the ratios. And on the last page, you can see where the past 8 quarters, they've passed 9 of 9 ratios. And the most recent quarter, they're passing 7 of 9 ratios. However, they did not pass 3 of 4 capital. So based off of this application and their performance with the benchmark ratios, Treasury staff recommends that commercial bank and trust could be brought into the pool at the 115% pledge level with an effective date of November 15th, 2022.
All right. Thank you, Roger. Does anybody have any follow-up questions for him about the content or status of the application? All right, if not, we do need a motion to approve the acceptance of Commercial Bank and Trust Company as a member of the pool.
I'll make a motion.
Thank you. And we need a second.
I'll second it. It's correct.
Thank you. We have a second. And Roger, will you do the roll call vote?
Mr. Dane Smith,
Aye.
Chairman Clinch,
Aye.
Mr. Arthur Taylor,
Aye.
Miss Allison Myers,
Aye.
Miss Megan Castle,
Aye.
Treasurer Lillard,
Aye.
Commissioner Gonzalez.
Aye.
And they are accepted as a member of the collateral pool. And so Treasury staff will reach out and notify them. All right, we have a new item on the agenda, which is a collateral pool stress test. The function of this is to look at the inherent risk that is applicable to the pool at the 90% pledge level. And Roger, will you give us a presentation about the test and the results?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Let's see. We'll bring in the large bank stress test. And so this, looking at this spreadsheet, you can see where it's somewhat of a continuation of the collateral status report with extra data added with additional calculations. And so what this simulated a large bank failure. And so when you're looking at this spreadsheet, the banks that are highlighted in green are the CBLR banks, the community bank leverage ratio banks. And so they have different calculations that go along with them. And so we simulated First Horizon being a failure of First Horizon. And so we pulled First Horizon out, and they would typically be line 45. So we pull them out, and with them pledging at 90%, the potential collateral shortfall would be $222,667,817. And so what we did then is we recalculated the percent liability in column F for the remaining banks. And with, we got column Q, S, U, and W from our vendor in order to calculate the leverage ratio before, and then we have a potential loss for each bank in column AA. We have the capital for each bank in column AB, and then the leverage ratio after the loss in column AC. And so after a large bank failure, there was only one bank that it impacted. You can see with where they were passing the ratio before, which caused them to fail the ratio after. And that was First Commerce Bank. And so with the large bank stress test only having one bank impacted, we did a medium bank stress test where we simulated a medium bank failure, and we did the same exercise, but with we pulled out Capstar Bank, and this generated a potential collateral shortfall of approximately 19,879,472. And going through the same exercise, it did not cause any bank who was passing ratio to then fail the tier 1 capital ratio. And so the summary after working through those two stress tests was that the collateral pool could sustain a bank failure at the 90% pledge level. Chairman, did you want to add anything?
The only addition I would make is that the threshold that we used was a well-capitalized threshold. And so the one bank in the extreme stress scenario that was pushed below the well-capitalized threshold was still adequately capitalized. They were not critically undercapitalized at all. So the stress test results show that the members of the collateral pool are strong, and we do have the ability to self-insure in the event of either an extreme stress or a medium stress scenario, which is a desirable outcome. And so I want to commend Roger for working so hard on this stress test. As bankers, we are intimately familiar with stress tests and the necessity of them to measure inherent risk. And we know that we can manage our inherent risk. In addition to that, we have controls in place, namely if a bank becomes distressed and starts to fail some of the metrics we have in place, they as an individual would be increased from the 90% to the 100 or 115% pledge level. Now there is a delay from the time we do the measurement and get the information and communicate that to the participant bank, but clearly our controls would mitigate the risk and the risk is manageable. Does anybody have any other comments or questions on the stress test?
Hey,
Madam
Roger,
Chair,
just quick question here. The losses that you were showing previously, were those pre-tax losses?
I'm pulling this back up. I don't
It would
pre-tax
be
losses.
pre-tax. Yeah, we didn't take into account tax effects. You're right.
So
it
that would be
less
that
after
would be
tax.
a favorable sort of impact to the actual impact that these banks would have, right?
Right, because it would reduce the after-tax loss. You are correct.
I mean, I think it still goes to show, Tyler, your point, just how much resilience there is in the Tennessee collateral pool. And this is a conservative assessment of the potential risk that the banks have.
Right. All right,
Thank you.
if the collateral pool board members are in agreement, this is something I think we should do on an annual basis. I think it would be helpful to make sure that we are up to date on the level of inherent risk in the pool.
Madam Chair, this is David Lillard. What dissemination is going to be made of this information that's on Roger's spreadsheet, if any?
Well, my understanding, certainly to the collateral pool members in terms of the aggregate outcome of the test, because I think we need to know that. And I will leave it up to your staff to determine as to whether there should be any additional dissemination.
Well, I just wonder, that number one, it's probably a public record in Tennessee if the board does adopt this test, and the staff, works up a spreadsheet like this. And I wonder, what use some third party who obtains that document might make of it, for their own purposes. So I don't know whether any members have any thoughts about that, but you're showing a potential, set of losses to member institutions. So I just want to point out that it's an open record, unless Allison Cleves, our counsel, wants to tell me differently.
I think this information already is a public record right here. And any record received or maintained by a state agency is a public record.
Roger and I talked about this a little bit. The information that we provide in terms of the amount of public deposits and the pro rata portion of the collateral pool is already public. So anybody could take that information and crunch the numbers and do this exact same stress test. I believe that there are some larger financial institutions that probably already do this on a regular basis for their own information. Most of the smaller banks are not going to take the time to do this, but I do think that it's important that members of the collateral pool feel comfortable as a self-insured pool that the risk is being monitored, measured, and managed. And that's my interest in doing the stress test.
Well, and I appreciate that. And I think it's a valid point that you raised, Madam Chair, but I just would point out for everybody's edification that you're right, that anybody with a calculator could sit down and calculate this. Those underlying figures are public, but we often get requests from the press, for instance, for information that if it hasn't been calculated and compiled, they go away and don't press on with it. On the other hand, if it's been calculated and compiled by us, then we have to furnish it to them. So I just want everybody on the board to know that, you could have a reporter on a slow day that decides this is a story of some sort, So just everybody needs to live in the world we have to live into, in the world of open records. All right. That happens to us quite frequently in the retirement system of the state, for instance. And so.
Do any board members have concern about this information being public on an annual basis?
I don't think I have a concern about it being public so long as we just make sure that we label it appropriately, that this is a stress test and not a forecast, right? I think that's an important designation that we've made here, and that, any sort of records that accompany that stress test, make sure that that's very clear.
Thank you. I think that's important as well.
I think the analysis could still work if you took the bank names out of it, and just did it based on the different line items. I think you could still make it work that way. If we wanted to kind of take out some of the identification of particular banks, that might be an option.
Yeah, I think that's a really good idea, to have all the information and reflect the analysis, but not necessarily point to any institution. I mean, this information is good. Somewhere down the road, it may not be good for individual institutions, and that might be a consideration.
Yeah, Roger, I think there's probably a way to do that within the context of the spreadsheet is to replace the name with a random identifying number.
Yes, I mean, certainly we could remove the names.
I think that would go a long way towards resolving any concern on the part of pool members. That's a good recommendation.
Well, it is a good recommendation, Madam Chair, but I'll just point out again that under the open records law, if a member of the press asks for this and their numbers substituted, for the names, they're going to ask for the key, and that's a matter of public record. There's no statute that says this is private information, okay? So I just want everybody to understand, where we are here.
Okay. That's good to know. Any further discussion? Is this something that the board is in agreement that we should do on an annual basis?
I think so. I think this is helpful.
Thank you, Dane.
Well, Madam Chair, this is David Lillard again. I just wonder whether we ought to have the staff look at this further from the standpoint of whether the stress test could be done on an aggregate basis, or some kind of category basis with banks of certain sizes or something grouped into categories rather than creating a document that individually identifies banks.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, we've got plenty of time if we do this annually anyway, so it would be beneficial to have Treasury staff continue to look at this and then report back to the pool, to the board members. Would that work?
Yep. That would be.
All right. All right. Okay, then we'll ask the Treasury staff to continue to analyze this and come up with some recommendations about how to complete this in the future and report back to the board members at our next meeting or subsequent meeting, just sometime in 2023. All right, that concludes the discussion of the collateral pool stress test, and thank you everybody for your discussion items. Roger, I'm going to turn the next one over to you also regarding state deposits.
Thank you, Chairman. Looking at page 27, we have a list of state CDs that are in the state pooled investment fund. And I put a little just paragraph there that relates, I guess, explains how CDs that are held or CD holdings in the SPIF are related to the collateral pool. And so basically, just to summarize it, the state pooled investment fund was established to receive and invest money in the custody of any officer of the state. For investment purposes, the funds in the local government investment pool have been commingled with the funds held in SPIF. Administration and responsibility for the proper operation of the SPIF are vested with state treasurer. And one of the authorized investment instruments are certificates of deposits with state depositories. And so those state depositories are required to collateralize state deposits. And so when you look at this chart, you can see as of October 11th, that the state pooled investment fund had $718,140,000 in state CDs, which then you can see the breakdown of which of those banks are in the collateral pool. And so, for example, First Citizens, Patriot Bank, Security, Simmons Bank, the Bank of Jackson, and Tower Community, all of those state CDs are collateralized through the collateral pool program. And that is what we have there. If there's any questions or comments or discussions on that.
Does anybody have any questions for Roger on that?
Madam Chair, this is David Lillard. I just wanted to say that the thing that jumped out at me on this is just that Simmons Bank has $560 million of value in that overall fund there. 77.98% of these CDs that are held by the SPIF. And granted, the CDs are a very small percentage, as Roger said, of the SPIF's assets overall, but I just want to point that out to board members to be apprised of that fact.
Thank you for bringing that to our attention. Do you see any additional risk associated with that? Is that something that the pool needs to be concerned about? Would be included in their public deposits, right?
Yeah, I've asked the staff to go back through and look at the legal documents, the pledge agreement, and whether we've complied with the applicable federal law, making sure that's approved by the board of the bank or a committee of the board, and re-examine the collateral just to make sure, because when you get that much concentration in a fund, it gets your attention from my standpoint, you know.
I assume that if you deemed that there was excessive risk, you all have the tools in place that you need to limit how much any particular bank could take in CD deposits?
Well, we probably do, but again, before we got to that point, we wanted to look and see about our security, et cetera. You know, we've
Right.
never had to limit anybody's participation in the pool for 13, nearly 14 years I've been treasurer, but you know, this is again something that's got our attention here now. So,
Well, we certainly appreciate you reviewing this and bringing it to our attention. And you'll give us a future report, I assume, if this is something that we need to examine again.
sure.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Treasurer.
Okay.
Roger, does that conclude the presentation on the state CD program?
Yes, that's all I had for that.
Thank you. All right, the next item on our agenda is scheduling some board meetings for 2023 in advance. As you know, it's hard with everybody's busy schedules to get an in-person meeting in Nashville on the calendar. We thought we would try to do it in advance. If we can discuss some general timeframes of months that work for people, then Roger will communicate to select the actual date. But we would like to try to meet in person in Nashville to the extent that people feel comfortable with it at this stage of the pandemic. So if we were to meet 3 times a year, this is October, our next meeting would be somewhere in the February timeframe. Does February work as in general that month for a meeting of the Collateral Pool Board? Does anybody have
Madam Chair,
any?
this is
Yes,
Yeah.
This is David Lillard. If I could make one comment, and that is that it may be that the board, you know, I agree with your suggestion that the board should probably schedule 3 regular meeting dates, whether it's a certain date of a certain month during the year that each one of those occurs. But we would not necessarily, it's up to you and the other members of the board, have to meet on that date if there's not anything that doesn't require a meeting, like a bank application or something like that, action that has to be taken. So that's another caveat that we might want to consider in looking at how we schedule how we actually act on these dates.
thank you. I appreciate that. So we could go ahead and get them on the calendar, and then if we don't need to meet, we would cancel it, maybe 10 days in advance of the meeting to free up people's
Right.
calendars. Okay, I think that would work well.
And I think that scenario would allow us to say to applicant banks that here's the meeting schedule of the board. It meets this day of this month, you know, whatever, 3 times a year. And in order to be considered at the next meeting, you would have to have your papers in by this meeting, you know, and get the staff time to prepare things. So it would allow for a schedule to be published in effect with banks that are interested in participating, because in the past we've gotten in a situation where they sometimes apply and they expect rather immediate action, you know, and so it gets to be an issue.
I appreciate that. I agree with you. I think it would be helpful to keep the application process running smoothly. All right, anybody that is not able to meet in February at any time? Is February generally good? I'd like to avoid March just because that's the last month in the quarter. And I know that can be busy for people.
We
All
just have
right.
to see how February looks from a legislative standpoint. I mean, you don't know until maybe the week before if you have a committee hearing or something like that. But those are typically on, for me, Tuesdays and Wednesdays.
So not Tuesday and Wednesday. I think we could accommodate that. Anybody else have any particular days in the month of February that are not good for them?
I'll second what Commissioner Gonzalez said.
Right, we will avoid the legislative calendar.
Yeah, that's good.
Okay. Let's see, if we met in February, then the next 4 months would be June. How does June look, generally speaking, for people?
I would think maybe towards the beginning of June, so you don't get into the 4th of July kind of vacation schedules.
Okay, that works for me. Early June?
Mhm.
Any other feedback on early June? Does that look feasible at this point in time? Okay, we'll try for that. And then 4 months after that would be October again. How does October look for people?
Looks just wonderful, Madam Chair.
All right. Any particular days during the month of October that should be avoided for the legislative calendar?
Perhaps Halloween wouldn't be a good omen, you know.
Well, yeah, we'll skip Halloween.
Yeah, well, we'll have probably some budget discussions internal, but there's no way to plan for that at this
Right.
point. So we
Right.
just work around it.
Okay. Well, what I will have Roger send out some proposed dates for February, June, and October. And we'll see if we can get 3 meetings on the calendar for 2023 for an in-person meeting in Nashville. And it would be great to see everybody's smiling face.
Right.
All right, is there any other business to come before the Collateral Pool Board? Okay, I thank everybody for your time and attention today and your participation, and this meeting is adjourned.